You know, we should be excited about our walk with God, but sometimes when God begins doing things in our lives, other people around us aren't nearly as excited about what's happening with us as we are. Today on Daily Renewal, that's what we're going to talk about. Hello everybody, this is Pastor Lyle and welcome to Daily Renewal. Today's session is titled, Serving God Through Disparagement. You know what I noticed is when God starts doing great things in your life and you're really excited about what He's doing, not everybody's as excited about it as you are. Sometimes there's jealousy. There are a lot of different things that come into people's heads when other people start moving ahead. And it's no different than in our walk with God. I'm going to relay a story today out of 2 Samuel. And a little bit of background to this story. This is David is bringing the Ark of the Covenant back into Jerusalem. And he's already attempted to do it, and it didn't work out real well. He didn't bring it in the way that God had intended to, and it ended up that he was actually angry at God. But once God had started to deal with him, he had the Ark of the Covenant in a guy's house named Obed-Edom, and God blessed Obed-Edom's house. And David, after going through what he needed to go through, he realized some things, and he thought, now is the time to bring the Ark of the Covenant into Jerusalem. So he's excited about it. And as he does that, we pick up the story in verse 12, chapter 6, 2 Samuel. It says, now it was told King David, saying, the Lord has blessed the house of Obed-Edom and all that belongs to him because the ark of God. So David went and brought up the ark of God from the house of Obed-Edom to the city of David with gladness. And so it was, when those bearing the ark of the Lord had gone 6 paces, that he sacrificed oxen and fatted sheep. And it says, then David danced before the Lord with all of his might. And David was wearing a linen ephod. So David and all the house of Israel brought up the ark of the Lord with shouting and with the sound of a trumpet. Now as the ark of the Lord came into the city of David, Michal, Saul's daughter, looked through a window and saw David leaping and whirling before the Lord, and she despised him in her heart. Well, isn't it interesting how there's 2 different ways of looking at what was happening in this story? There was David's view, where David, who as a king, he so reverenced God that he actually got rid of his kingly robes and he danced before the Lord in an ephod. In other words, what David was doing is he was trying to show the people that, you know what, God is so holy, God is so amazing, God is so mighty that I'm not even worthy of calling myself a king in his sight. You know, he humbled himself and he showed to the people that even as the king, he needed to be humble in the presence of God. And so that's how he showed it. But then on the other hand, you have a totally different view. You have his wife peering through the window, who grew up in royalty. Remember, her dad was the previous king, and his heart was not right before God. And a lot of the things he did, I'm sure, would have been done to look good on the outside. And so we see Michal looking at David, and she's ashamed of the way that David is acting because he's not acting like a king. And the people need to see him as a king. And so we have David, who's excited and humble, and we have Michal, who's embarrassed by the actions of her husband. Then from verse 17 it says, so they brought the ark of the Lord and set it in its place in the midst of the tabernacle that David had erected for it. And then David offered burnt offerings and peace offerings before the Lord. And when David had finished offering burnt offerings and peace offerings, he blessed the people in the name of the Lord of hosts. And then he distributed it among all the people, among the whole multitude of Israel, both the women and the men, to everyone a loaf of bread, a piece of meat, and a cake of raisins. So all the people departed, everyone to his house. Now, I want you to picture what this would have been like for David. Here's David. He's been wanting to bring the ark in. He wants to do right by God. He's a man after God's own heart. And he finally brings the Ark of the Covenant in. And he has this amazing experience with God. And all of the kingdom is watching. And he feels so good about it. Everybody is happy. And he hands out all these raisin cakes and things. I mean, he's just having an amazing day. An amazing experience with God. And then he goes home. And then reality hits. Not everybody thought that was an amazing day. Now, I don't know about you, but I've noticed a lot of times when I have an amazing experience with God, I have to guard myself, because right afterwards, often, there will be a form of spiritual attack, and we need to be ready for that. We need to understand that what happens often with us is we can have discouragement come to us through people. In this case, we see that discouragement comes through somebody that's very close to David, and that is his wife. We read on in verse 20, we see that when David returned to bless his household, and Michal, the daughter of Saul, came out to meet David, she said, "How glorious was the king of Israel today, uncovering himself today in the eyes of the minds of his servants, as one of the base fellows shamelessly uncovers himself." See, he comes home and immediately he's attacked. And for us, we need to be aware that even sometimes people that love us, the enemy can use them in such a way to get us off track spiritually, to get us to potentially doubt our experience. This even happened, believe it or not, with Jesus in Matthew 16. In Matthew 16, just to give you an example how a real spiritual person, somebody that hears from God, can even be used by the devil. Give you an example. Peter, in Matthew 16, we're looking at from verses 21 to 23, we see that, actually, let's say a little bit further than that. Peter, in verse 13, when Jesus came into the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, saying, "Who do men say that the Son of Man is?" And so they said, some said that he was John the Baptist, some Elijah, and others Jeremiah, or one of the prophets. And he said to them, "But who do you say that I am?" Now, this is an important question, because, first of all, I said, "Who are people saying that I am?" And they answer. And then he looks at me and he says, "I want to know from you guys, the one who are the closest to me." He wanted to see if they understood who he was, after the ones that hung out with him the most. And so from there he says, "Who do you say that I am?" And Simon Peter answered and said, "You're the Christ, the Son of the living God." And Jesus was excited about this. He says, "Blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. And I also say to you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it." And can you imagine what that would have been like being Peter? He was excited because it was obvious that God had spoken to him. And it was obvious to everybody else that God had spoken to Peter as well. And yet, the interesting part is this: Jesus begins to predict his death around verse 21. And in verse 22, this is right after this happened. Peter hears from God. Verse 22, Peter took him aside and began to rebuke Jesus, saying, "Far be it from you, Lord, that this shall not happen to you." And Jesus turned to Peter and said, "Get behind me, Satan. You are an offense to me, for you are not mindful of the things of God, but the things of men." So this shows us that we can have people that are walking with God that can be used by the enemy in a negative way. So back to the story with David. We see that often the enemy will use people, just like he did with Peter and Jesus. The enemy often uses people that are closest to us to bring disparagement, to try and get us to doubt maybe what God has said in our lives. There's been many times where I really believe that God has spoken something clearly to me, or like I said, had an experience with God, and soon after somebody would come along and, did God really say that? Well, let's talk about how David handled this disparagement. David's response we see in verse 21. I'll just read from verses 21 to 23. It says, "So David said to Michal, 'It was before the Lord who chose me instead of your father and all the house to appoint me ruler over the people of the Lord over Israel. Therefore, I will play music before the Lord, and I will even be more undignified than this. And I'll be humble in my own sight. But as for the maidservants who you have spoken, by them I will be held in honor.' Therefore, Michal, the daughter of Saul, had no children to the day of her death." Wow, what a reaction. So what does that say about David's response? Well, the first thing that he did in response is he loved her. There's no doubt about it. But it's very clear all through Scripture that those who serve God need to serve God first. Now, he loved his wife, but when he knew that God spoke and he knew that he was doing what was right in the eyes of God, it was important, whether his wife liked it or whether she didn't, he was going to serve God first. That was the first thing that he did. The second thing we see is that he understood that not only did he humble himself, but when he was questioned about his motives with this by his wife, his first response was, you know what? I'm trying to show you that I'm humbling myself before God, but if I have to be even more undignified, I'll go even further if I have to, rather than try to be manipulated in this situation to calm it down. I've got a lot left in the tank. In other words, I got a lot more that if I have to go even further, I will, because God is so worth it. The third principle that we see here, as he realized, it's amazing how his wife actually took the idea of the maidservants looking at him and what will they think. Well, David understood that it's through true humility before God that others who are serving God would totally understand and respect what David was trying to do. Those very maidservants that his wife said would look at him and mock or see him in the wrong way. He says, no. In fact, if those people want to see an example of somebody that is giving everything for God, they saw it today, and they will respect that. There's going to be people that don't like what's happening in your life. But I'm going to tell you this. There's others that are watching. And as you serve God with everything that you have, it will be a great example to them, and it will encourage them to do the same. And that's what the church needs today. It needs people that are excited about God, because it'll encourage others to say, you know what? Obviously, there's more to go in my life. There's further places that God wants to bring me. And let me tell you that serving God is exciting. It is amazing when you choose to make Jesus Christ first in your life. So be a light. Be somebody that shines bright for Jesus, and it'll encourage others to do so as well. And we also need to remember in Matthew 10:33, Jesus said, whoever denies me before men, him I will also deny before my Father who is in heaven. The question you need to ask yourself when in anything to do with how you're serving God, are you doing things that would deny him before men? David did not do that. David was more than willing to say, if men are watching, I'm giving everything I got. Well, I hope you got something out of that today. I just want to encourage you, if you did, subscribe to my YouTube channel. Also, we're on Twitter, Instagram, and like us on Facebook. Bless you. Have a great day.